It started the way most secrets do, quietly. Somewhere between midnight coffee and the glow of a laptop screen, she began to write. Her name was Ava Reed, a 21-year-old literature student who preferred the company of her imagination over people. In her tiny apartment overlooking the city, she found freedom not in conversation, but in words. Every night when the world went silent, Ava escaped into a world of her own making, a digital universe where danger and desire coexisted. Her story, a BL fanfic about a ruthless Mafia boss and his devoted right-hand man, a forbidden romance built from shadows, loyalty, and stolen glances. She wrote it for fun. For herself. For the thrill of turning something dark into something human. To her, it was fiction, nothing more. Just a story no one in the real world would ever read. But the internet had other plans. Her story, titled Blood and Velvet, spread like wildfire through forums, fan sites, and private groups. The comments multiplied. Readers begged for updates. People analyzed her characters as if they were real, as if they knew the man she'd written about. And in a way, they did, because he was real. The Mafia boss she had written into existence wasn't born from imagination alone. He had a name, Luca Moretti, and a reputation that could silence a room. She'd seen him once, from across the street outside a restaurant downtown. The way his guards hovered around him, the sharpness in his gaze, the quiet command in every step, that image stayed with her for months, so she turned him into a story. She made him vulnerable, beautiful, capable of love, something she doubted the real man ever was, and that was her mistake, because the internet has no walls. And words, once released, have a way of finding their way home. One night, while Ava typed the final paragraph of Chapter 23, she noticed something odd. A new comment, from a user named MOfficial. At first, she smiled. Probably a fan. The username felt mysterious, maybe even playful. She clicked on it. No profile picture, no details. Just one line in the bio. Truth is stranger than fiction. She laughed, shrugged, and went back to writing. She didn't know that somewhere across the city, in a glass office overlooking the skyline, a man in a black suit was reading her story, line by line, his expression unreadable, his name appearing again and again on her screen, reimagined, romanticized, exposed. And when he reached the part where the fanfic version of himself whispered, "I'd burn the world just to keep you," the real Luca Moretti smiled, a slow, dangerous smile, because Ava Reed had just written about a man who didn't like being fictionalized. And tomorrow, he would find out exactly who she was. Every story begins as fiction, until the person you wrote about decides to make it real. The next morning, Ava's world was the same, on the surface. The same tiny apartment, the same chipped coffee mug, the same half-broken desk lamp humming softly beside her laptop. But something felt different. She couldn't explain it, only that strange heaviness that lingers before a storm. She opened her notifications, dozens of new comments, hearts, messages. But one caught her eye, from the same username, MOfficial. This time the comment wasn't playful. It read, "You write about monsters as if they can't read." Her stomach dropped. For a second, she thought it was a joke. Someone trolling, maybe a fan playing detective. But there was something sharp about the words. Something that didn't belong to the internet's usual noise. She replied, trying to sound casual. "That's the fun of fiction." No response. Just silence. The kind of silence that crawls under your skin and waits. Hours later, as she walked across campus, her mind replayed that line again and again. "You write about monsters as if they can't read." Was it possible? No. The real Luca Moretti would never waste a second reading fan fiction. He ran an empire. He made headlines, not Reddit threads, and yet, her story had been too specific. The name of his company, the way his scar curved across his jaw, the exact make of the car he drove, things she'd seen once, and filled in with imagination. But what if someone close to him had seen it too? That night, she told herself to stop checking, to let it go, but she couldn't. Curiosity is its own kind of addiction. She opened her email and froze. At the top of her inbox was a new message. From EmmaMorettiMHoldings.com and object, "You have a gift, Miss Reed." Her hand shook. No attachments, no threats, just a single sentence in the body of the email. "Join me for coffee. Let's talk about your story." And below it, an address. Downtown. The same cafe she'd written about in Chapter 12, the scene where her fictional Mafia boss met his lover for the first time. It couldn't be real. It had to be someone playing with her. Still, she couldn't stop staring. Her mind fought itself. Logic versus fascination, fear versus temptation. Every instinct screamed not to go, but another voice whispered louder. What if it really is him? So she printed the email, slipped it into her notebook, and told herself she wouldn't go. She said it out loud, twice. And yet, the next morning, she found herself standing outside that very cafe, her reflection trembling in the glass door. Inside, a man in a dark suit sat alone at a corner table, stirring his espresso without looking up. The scar on his jaw caught the light. Ava Reed forgot how to breathe, because fiction had just looked back. And for the first time, the author had become part of her own story. Ava didn't remember walking through the door. One moment she was outside, heart pounding like an uninvited drumbeat. The next she was inside the cafe, breathing in the scent of roasted coffee and danger. The man looked up. Not just with curiosity, but recognition. Like someone meeting an old friend from a dream. His eyes were darker than she'd imagined. Not black. No, they were the kind of brown that looked like smoke curling through whiskey. The kind that saw too much and forgot nothing. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Miss Reed," he said, as if he'd known her name his entire life. "Please, sit." And she did. Against every logical thought, she sat. The air between them was too still. Too heavy. It wasn't how she'd imagined meeting him. If she'd ever imagined it at all. In her stories, Luca Moretti was charming, playful, a little wicked but human. The man in front of her, though, was all silence and precision. He smiled faintly, not with warmth, but with understanding. "You're braver than I expected." Her throat tightened. I didn't mean any harm." "Oh, I know," he said softly. "Writers rarely do. But they build worlds. And sometimes they build people who look a lot like us." His tone wasn't angry. If anything, it was curious, like he was trying to understand the girl who had turned him into something beautiful. She wanted to explain. To say it wasn't about him, not really. But how do you tell a man that he became your metaphor for everything powerful and untouchable? He leaned forward. "Tell me, Ava, why me?" The way he said her name, it wasn't a question anymore. It was a claim. Her voice trembled. "Because you're real. Because the world you live in feels untouchable, dangerous, and I wanted to make something good out of it." A long silence. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Low, genuine, like thunder beneath velvet. "You wrote about me falling in love with a man who would die for me," he said. "And yet you made me human." Her cheeks burned. "It was fiction." He tilted his head. "And yet here you are." For a moment, she couldn't tell who was studying who, the author or the subject. She realized something unsettling then. He wasn't angry. He was intrigued. He reached into his jacket and placed something on the table, a printed copy of her story. Blood and velvet, every page marked, highlighted, annotated. He'd read every word. "I think you're talented," he said finally, "but talent needs truth. Would you like to see what the real world looks like?" Her heart stumbled. "What do you mean?" He smiled. That slow, deliberate smile that meant he already knew her answer. "Come with me. Miss Reed, let's make your story real." And just like that, the girl who wrote about danger stepped into it. Not as an observer, but as the next chapter. By the time Ava realized she'd said yes, it was already too late to take it back. Luca Moretti didn't move like other people. He didn't walk, he arrived. And wherever he went, silence followed. Even the city seemed to lower its volume for him. She sat beside him in the back seat of a sleek black car, windows tinted darker than night. The hum of the engine filled the spaces where words should have been. Outside, the city blurred. Neon signs, rain-slicked streets, people who would never know the story unfolding above their heads. Voiceover softens. Ava had written about this world countless times. Now she was living it. When the car stopped, they stepped into a glass building that touched the clouds. Security guards nodded as Luca passed, their eyes never lingering too long. Everyone seemed to know who he was, and to fear him just enough. He didn't announce her. Didn't explain why she was there. He simply led her into an elevator, pressed the top floor, and said, "Writers see what others ignore. I want to know what you'll see here." The elevator doors opened to a panoramic office overlooking the skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk made of dark walnut, a single orchid blooming by the glass. It was elegant, minimal, cold, like him. "This," he said, motioning to the view, "is the world you turned into fan fiction." Ava swallowed. "You read it all?" "Every word," he said. "Some of it made me laugh. Some of it made me think." Then his tone darkened. "And some of it made me wonder how you knew so much." Her breath hitched. "I didn't. I guessed. I swear it was all imagination." He studied her, silent, unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Good, keep that honesty. I like it." He turned away, gazing out the window. "You wrote about my assistant, Marco, didn't you?" Ava nodded carefully. "Yes, he'll be your guide," Luca said. "For a few days. You'll see how things really work here." She blinked. "Why?" "Because," he said, turning to face her, "you built a fantasy about me. I want to see if you can still write when you're standing in the truth." It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, but somehow it felt more dangerous than either. For the next few hours, she followed Marco through corridors filled with power she could feel. Men in suits speaking in half sentences, deals happening with a single nod. It was the same world she'd written, but colder, heavier, real. By evening, Luca returned. "Tell me, Miss Reed," he asked quietly. "Still think I'm just a character?" She met his eyes, steady this time. "No, you're something worse." He smiled faintly. "Good, then keep watching." That night, Ava realized she wasn't just observing anymore. She'd crossed a line she couldn't unwrite, and the story was no longer hers to control. Ava didn't know what she expected when Luca said she could see his world. Maybe something glamorous, velvet chairs, crystal glasses, expensive laughter. Instead, what she saw was control disguised as calm. Every hallway of the Moretti building had eyes. Every door required permission. People spoke in quiet tones. Every sentence weighed before it left their lips. It was power, but not the kind her stories had captured. In her fanfic, Luca was magnetic, irresistible. In real life, he was measured, terrifyingly patient, and every inch the man no one dared to question. Marco, his assistant, guided her from one meeting to another. He was polite, efficient, and impossible to read. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it felt practiced, like it was part of the job. Ava tried to make small talk, but he always redirected it back to work. By noon, she realized she wasn't just a guest. She was being watched. Someone was always nearby. A guard in the corner, a receptionist who glanced at her a little too long, a phone that stopped ringing the second she turned her head. It wasn't paranoia, it was precision. Luca's world didn't leave anything to chance. When she finally saw him again that evening, he was sitting in his office, reading a document under soft amber light. Without looking up, he said, "What did you learn today?" "That you don't run a company," she answered quietly. "You command it." He lifted his eyes, a hint of amusement there. "And what does your writer's mind make of that?" "That it's lonely." That made him pause. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he closed the file, leaned back, and said, "Loneliness is a luxury. Only people with peace can afford it." It was such a strange answer, cold, yet honest. The kind of truth you never hear in interviews or stories. And for the first time, she saw him not as the character she'd created, but as the man he'd become. He stood and walked toward the window, the skyline burning orange behind him. "You wrote about me falling in love," he said. "But love doesn't survive here." "Not in this world," Ava's heart twisted. "Then why show it to me?" He turned then, his expression unreadable. "Because you wrote me into something I'm not. I want to see how long it takes before you understand why." That night he offered her a car home. She refused. She needed air, distance, clarity. As she walked through the streets, she realized something haunting. Her story had predicted pieces of this world without her knowing. The tension, the silence, the weight of every choice. She used to think she'd written fiction to escape reality. Now she wondered if, somehow, she had been writing toward it. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Because once you write about monsters, they start to remember your name. The next morning came with rain. It drummed against Ava's window, steady and relentless, the kind of sound that feels like a warning before you understand what for. She tried to focus on her notes, half-scribbled phrases about power, control, human masks, but her thoughts kept circling back to him. Luca Moretti, the man who had stepped out of her story and into her life. Her phone buzzed. A single text, 10 a.m. sharp, don't be late. No name, no signature, but she didn't need one. When she arrived at the building, Marco was already waiting. He said nothing as he handed her a tablet. On the screen were short reports, numbers, routes, coded phrases that meant nothing to her. He wants you to read, Marco said. He thinks you'll find patterns. That was what writers did. Ava scanned line after line, her mind picking up rhythm and tone more than content. There were small details, times that repeated, locations that echoed her own descriptions from the fanfic. It felt impossible, as if her imagination had drawn from something real. By noon, she felt his presence before she saw him. Luca entered the room with the same stillness that made everyone else fade. You notice things others don't, he said. You predicted something we didn't see. He took the tablet from her hands and placed it aside. That's talent. Dangerous but useful. She tried to steady her voice. You're treating me like an employee. You wrote yourself into my world, he said simply. Now you'll see what it costs to stay here. He walked her through rooms that weren't meant for strangers. Men discussed shipments, finances, loyalty. Everyone deferred to him with a mix of fear and faith. He never raised his voice, never needed to. Power radiated from his calm, not his anger. Somewhere between those corridors, Ava saw it, how every person in his orbit seemed to orbit alone. The respect, the silence, the absence of laughter. Luca wasn't just feared. He was isolated. The life she'd romanticized in her story looked hollow from the inside. When the day ended, he poured 2 glasses of wine and said, You changed the way people see me, you know. That story of yours travels further than you think. She froze. You've been tracking it? I track everything, he replied, including the woman who gave me a heart I didn't ask for. He took a slow sip. You made me human on the page. Now I'm curious which one of us believes it more, you or me. Ava didn't answer. She couldn't. The line between fascination and fear had thinned until it was almost invisible. That night, when she returned home, she deleted the draft from her laptop. But even as the words vanished, she knew deletion meant nothing. The story had already slipped loose from her control, and from him, it had found a life of its own. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. It only fell harder, as if the city itself was reminding her. Once you write a man into existence, you can't unwrite what he becomes. Ava told herself she would stop. She told herself she'd go back to class, back to ordinary life, back to coffee stains and overdue papers. But her phone kept buzzing with messages from Marco. Meetings, notes, instructions written like invitations she couldn't refuse. And always, at the end, the same signature. From him. She returned to the Moretti building 3 days later. The security guard nodded without needing to check her name. People already knew who she was. The boss's writer. The one who'd turned him into legend. Luca was waiting in the same office, sleeves rolled, tie gone, a man who looked too relaxed for someone feared by an entire city. On the desk sat a printout of her deleted draft. He had a copy. You shouldn't have erased it, he said. It was the most honest version of me I've ever read. Ava stood frozen. You had no right. I have every right, he interrupted, calm but sharp. When someone writes my life, I get to read the ending. He leaned back, eyes studying her the way some people study art they don't fully understand. You gave me emotions I don't possess, desire, doubt, the luxury of hesitation. Now I wonder, did you write what you saw or what you wanted? She wanted to argue, to walk out, to tell him she wasn't part of this game. But the truth was more complicated. The way he said her name, the way his voice softened when he quoted her own lines back to her, it disarmed her. He was still dangerous, but now that danger had warmth in it, and that was worse. That afternoon, he asked her to follow him somewhere quiet. They drove past the edge of the city, into hills where the air felt cleaner but the silence heavier. The car stopped near an old villa surrounded by olive trees and fog. "This is where I grew up," he said. "You wrote that I had no past, but every monster starts somewhere." Inside, the house was nearly empty. Just walls, echoes, and one dusty piano. Luca ran a hand across it. "My mother used to play. You made her vanish in your story. Why?" "I didn't know you had one," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "That's the problem with writers. You think you know everything." She wanted to ask why he was showing her this, but she already knew. He wanted to be understood, not by his men or his enemies, but by the girl who had turned his brutality into something almost beautiful. When he looked at her again, something in his gaze had shifted. Curiosity had become hunger, not the kind born of desire, but of possession. The way an artist looks at the muse he's afraid to lose. That night, as the villa lights glowed faintly through the rain, Ava realized what scared her most wasn't that she had written him into her world, but that he was now rewriting her into his. And this time, she didn't know how the story would end. Days passed like scenes she didn't remember writing. Ava stopped trying to mark the difference between visiting and staying. Every morning she woke to the same text from Marco. He wants you at the office? And every night she found herself back in that glass tower, watching the man she once invented move through his world as if every heartbeat had a schedule. Luca never shouted, never hurried. He spoke softly and expected the world to bend. Even his silences had weight. The first few times she watched him work, she thought she was observing power. Later she realized she was watching loneliness shaped into routine. One evening, after a long meeting, he told her to sit. The office was empty, the city below washed in rainlight. He placed 2 files in front of her. "Read these," he said. Inside were names, photographs, dates, a ledger of people whose lives had brushed too close to his business. Some alive, some not. Her stomach tightened. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you already know too much," he said. "And I'd rather you understand it than imagine it." She pushed the file away. "I didn't ask to be part of this." He studied her face. "You wrote about me killing a man in your story. You made it poetic. You made it necessary." "That was fiction." He leaned forward. "You made it feel real. So tell me, Ava, how does it feel now that it is?" The question burned through her. She wanted to walk out, but something in his eyes held her there. Something that wasn't cruelty but a strange, weary honesty. He didn't enjoy her fear. He was testing it, measuring what she could bear. Finally he spoke again, quieter. "Do you know why I kept reading your story?" She shook her head. "Because you wrote me as if there was still something left to save." The confession unsettled her more than any threat could have. It wasn't a boast. It was an admission. He stood, walked to the window, and continued. "People see what I do. You saw why. Maybe that's the difference." She felt the air shift then. The tension between them had changed shape. It wasn't predator and prey anymore, not quite. It was something harder to name. 2 people who saw each other too clearly for comfort. Later, as Marco drove her home, he said quietly, "You shouldn't get close to him." Ava looked out the window. It's too late for that. Back in her apartment, she opened her laptop for the first time in weeks. Her fanfic site was flooded with messages, readers begging for the next chapter. They wanted the ending. She stared at the blank screen, fingers trembling. The words wouldn't come, because for the first time, she didn't know where fiction ended and her life began. And maybe that was his plan all along, to make sure the only story she could write from now on was his. Ava kept telling herself she was free to leave. She could walk out of his world any time, return to her quiet apartment, the stacks of half-read novels, the laptop that had once been her only mirror. But every morning the phone rang, and every morning she answered. Habit disguised itself as choice. Luca's tone changed first. He no longer asked her to come in, he told her. The conversations that had once been about writing became something else. Questions about her routines, her friends, the places she went when she wasn't with him. When she said she preferred to stay home, he smiled in that calm, unreadable way. Good, he said. Home is safer. At the office, people stopped meeting her eyes. Marco avoided small talk altogether. There was a new stillness in the halls, the kind that precedes a storm no one dares name. One afternoon, she caught 2 guards whispering her name. They went silent the moment she looked at them. That night, she tried to delete every file connected to the story again, but copies appeared on her tablet, clean, formatted, untouched. He had them all. He always had them all. The next morning, Luca invited her to breakfast in a private dining room at the tower's top floor. The view stretched endless and pale beneath the rain. A table set for 2. He poured her coffee himself. You stopped writing, he said, not a question. I told you I'm done. He tilted his head, eyes steady. You're not done. You just don't know how to end it without me. She felt heat crawl up her neck. You can't control what I write. He smiled, slow and deliberate. You're sitting in the ending right now. He reached across the table and handed her a small black notebook. Inside, the first page was already filled, in her own handwriting. Except she hadn't written it. The words were copied from her deleted draft. Every sentence about him, every line she'd erased, transcribed by someone else. I wanted to preserve your truth, he said. You don't get to destroy it. She pushed the notebook away, heart pounding. You don't get to decide what's mine. His voice softened, almost kind. Ava, you built me. You gave me a soul and then tried to take it back. Don't you see? You belong to the world you created. For a moment, she thought he would let her go. Instead, he touched her wrist. Lightly, but enough to make her freeze. Stay until the story finishes, he murmured. Then you can leave, if you still want to. That night she dreamed of words bleeding through paper, each page whispering her name. When she woke, her phone was glowing beside her bed. A new message waited. Chapter 24. The author who tried to run. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She already knew who had written it, and for the first time, she understood that the story she'd begun for herself now belonged entirely to him. Ava stopped sleeping through the night. Every time she closed her eyes, words began writing themselves behind her eyelids. Sentences she didn't remember typing, scenes she didn't remember creating. Luca's voice echoed through them all, low, patient, inevitable. By day, she went through the motions, coffee, taxi, tower, office, but inside her head, a rebellion was forming. She'd realized something dangerous. If he believed the story defined reality, maybe she could change the story first. So she began to write again. Secretly, quietly. On a cheap second-hand laptop she bought in cash, one he didn't know existed. She wrote in cafes, in bathrooms, in brief snatches of solitude. The new story looked the same on the surface, same characters, same world, but the plot was different. This time the boss didn't control the author. The author learned to control him. She called the draft version 2. But she couldn't hide forever. The Mafia tower had eyes. Marco saw her once at a cafe, typing fast, her fingers trembling. He didn't say a word then, but the next morning, Luca was waiting in her apartment building's lobby, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. He followed her up the stairs without asking. You've been avoiding me, he said. I've been writing. Without telling me? She met his gaze. I don't owe you everything I write. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to be angry or impressed. Then he smiled, that small, deliberate smile that always made her stomach twist. That's good, he said softly. You're learning to lie like one of us. He left without touching her, but on the way out, he glanced at her desk. A strand of unease coiled in her chest. When she returned to her apartment later that night, Version 2 was gone. The laptop still sat open, but the document was blank. Every word deleted, the file name changed to one she hadn't made. The author's confession. She felt the blood drain from her face. The words she'd written to free herself had become another weapon in his hands. Hours later, her phone rang. His voice came through the line, calm as always. "You can't rewrite what's already true, Ava. The story doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to both of us." She tried to keep her voice steady. "Then maybe I'll just stop writing." He laughed once, softly. "You won't. Writers never stop. They just run out of places to hide." The line went dead. That night, she opened a blank notebook and began again. She didn't write about Luca. She wrote about a woman who escaped. About a world that burned behind her. About a man who thought he could control a story, but didn't see the ending coming. Every word was a risk. Every page a secret. But it was hers. For now. And as dawn spilled into the room, Ava whispered to herself, "If he wants to finish my story, he'll have to catch me first." Ava had always believed that words could protect her. But by now, she'd learned, they could also betray her. Her story, version 2, was meant to be a weapon. Each line she wrote was a piece of coded defiance, disguised as fiction. But somehow, Luca was always one step ahead. Every time she thought she'd written something in secret, he already knew. It started with small things. One morning she wrote a scene where the heroine met a stranger at a bookstore, a man who promised her a way out. 2 days later, when Ava stopped by a real bookstore to clear her head, that same man was there. Same smile, same words. "I've been expecting you." Her blood ran cold. She didn't wait to find out who he was working for. She ran until her lungs burned. When she got home, her apartment door was already unlocked. Inside, everything looked untouched, except for her desk. Her notebook was open. A single line written in his handwriting waited there. "Your story tells me everything, Ava." That night, she didn't write at all. She sat in silence, heart pounding, realizing what she'd done. Her rebellion had become a roadmap straight into her thoughts. Every scene she wrote was a confession, every metaphor a breadcrumb leading him closer. Still, she couldn't stop. Writing was her only way of breathing, so she changed her tactics. She began to write in reverse, pages filled with false clues, twisted reflections, fake symbols of freedom. She wrote about leaving the city when she had no intention to, about trusting people she'd never met, about hiding in places she'd never go. But Luca wasn't a man easily fooled. The next morning, he appeared at her door again, holding her latest chapter printed out, annotated, circled in red. "I like this new direction," he said calmly. "The double meanings. The misdirection. You think you're clever?" He stepped closer. "But every lie you write still starts with a truth you're trying to hide." His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "Tell me, Ava, where are you really going?" She tried to hold his stare. "Nowhere." Wrong answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small flash drive. "This tease," he said, "is your next chapter. You'll post it tonight." She took it with trembling fingers. "What's on it?" "Reality," he said. "Our version." When he left, she stared at the flash drive, pulse thudding in her ears. She could obey and let him rewrite her story again. Or she could defy him and risk everything. At midnight, she made her choice. She opened her fanfic account, uploaded a new chapter, but not his. Instead, she titled it, "The Author's Warning." It wasn't fiction anymore. It was a message to anyone who'd ever read her work before. "If you find this, I'm not safe." And then, without hesitation, she hit post. By dawn, Ava's warning had spread farther than she ever imagined. Her story, what began as a harmless fanfic, was suddenly everywhere. Screenshots flooded social media, hashtags formed. People debated whether it was real or just an elaborate performance. But the ones who had followed her since the beginning, they knew her tone. They could feel the fear in every line. Within hours, the author's warning trended on forums and fan servers under one question. Is Ava in danger? Some thought it was a stunt. Others started digging. They traced details she'd written months ago, landmarks, descriptions, street names. They found the glass tower that matched her fictional headquarters. They found records of a company linked to Luca Moretti. And then, the comments turned into coordinates. She woke that morning to hundreds of messages. "Are you okay? Who is he? Tell us what's happening. We can help." But there was no way to explain the truth. How could she tell her readers, the people who had once loved her story, that the villain she'd invented had stepped out of the screen and into her life? She shut off her phone. Too late. A black car waited outside her building. 2 men got out first. Marco followed. And behind them, Luca. He didn't look angry. That was the worst part. He looked amused. Inside her apartment, he set his phone on the table, screen glowing. "You've gone viral," he said lightly. "Congratulations. The world loves you." He turned the screen toward her. A video of her fanfic account. Thousands of comments flashing like tiny alarms. She whispered, "They'll figure out who you are." He smiled. "They won't. I control what they see. I always have." She felt the blood drain from her face. "You're watching everything." He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "I told you, Ava, you gave me life. You don't get to take it back." Something broke inside her then. Not fear, but fury. For months she'd lived in his shadow, written his story, spoken his words. But not anymore. Her laptop was still open. Without breaking eye contact, she typed the next line of her story. The author looked her creation in the eye and said, "You're not real." He froze. Just for a second. Enough to make her believe she'd struck something vital. "You shouldn't play games you can't finish," he said quietly. "Delete it." She didn't move. "Make me." The silence stretched between them. Long, electric, dangerous. Finally, he stepped back, hands in his pockets. "Fine. Let's finish it your way." Then he turned and left, leaving the door wide open behind him. Ava sank to the floor, shaking but alive. Outside, she could hear the distant hum of traffic. The world was still moving. And maybe, just maybe, her story was too. Her readers thought it was fiction. Her enemies thought it was a warning. But to her, it was both. And she had just written the first line of her escape. The world thought it was a story. That was her advantage. By the time Luca realized what she'd done, her words had already become her camouflage. Thousands of readers were speculating, rewriting, reposting. Fan theories flooded the internet, drowning the truth in noise. Every edit she made, every update, was a breadcrumb only she could read. Hidden between lines of dialogue and scene descriptions were coordinates, bus routes, meeting points. She'd built a maze out of her own fiction, and inside it, she disappeared. On the morning she ran, the sky was still dark. She packed one bag, laptop, passport, a handful of cash, and left the rest behind. No phone, no trace. She slipped through a back exit, her hood up, the city not yet awake. By the time Luca's men reached her building, she was already gone, but she didn't run without help. Her readers, unaware of how close to the truth they'd come, had started decoding her posts. One username in particular kept sending her messages written in her own literary style. Each message ended the same way. "We believe you." She didn't know who they were. She didn't care. Their clues led her across the city to an abandoned train station where she caught a bus heading north. The rain followed her, soft and endless. Every few miles she checked the reflections in the windows, faces blurred, lights flickering. She tried not to imagine black cars on the highway behind her. That night, she stopped in a small coastal town that smelled of salt and smoke. She rented a room under a false name, locked the door twice, and opened her laptop. The screen blinked. Notifications poured in. Her latest chapter had gone viral again. The author vanishes. Except she hadn't written it. Her pulse spiked. She opened the file. It was written in her exact voice, her tone, her phrasing. Only one thing was off. The final line. "The boss always finds what belongs to him." Her chest tightened. He was writing now. Using her style, her world, her readers, he had turned the fanfic site, the only safe place she had left, into a weapon. She slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. She was no longer just hiding from Luca. She was hiding from her own story. Outside, the sea wind howled against the window. Somewhere far below, She could hear the low growl of an engine, steady, patient, waiting, she whispered to herself. You can't follow words if there are none left. So she did the one thing she never thought she could do. She deleted her account. Every chapter, every comment, every trace of her name. The world went silent. For the first time in months, there was no story left. No voice, no her. But as she stared out into the night, a thought struck her cold. What if he didn't need her account to find her anymore? What if he had already written the next chapter, and she was living in it? For 3 weeks, Ava lived like a ghost. No phone, no internet, no name. Each day she moved between towns, never sleeping in the same place twice, never speaking long enough for anyone to remember her face. She told herself she was free, that deleting everything had severed the connection between them. That silence meant safety, but silence also meant isolation, and isolation had a way of echoing. One afternoon, in a dusty seaside cafe, she heard it, her own words. Not exactly hers, but close enough to make her blood freeze. A young woman was reading aloud from a glossy new paperback. Ava turned, and the title hit her like a blow. The Author's Confession, by Luca Moretti. Her throat tightened. She took the book from the table, fingers trembling. The cover was black and gold, her old story title embossed beneath his name. She opened it. Line after line, her dialogue, her pacing, her metaphors, stared back at her. Whole paragraphs lifted from her fanfic, rearranged just enough to seem original. But it wasn't just plagiarism, it was possession. Every trace of her voice had been rewritten as his. Even her author's notes were gone, replaced with dedications that made her skin crawl. To the one who gave me life, you know who you are. She felt sick. The cafe TV flickered to a live interview. Luca sat in a studio, immaculate as ever, answering questions from a talk show host. The headline read, best-selling author and businessman Luca Moretti on his breakout novel. His voice was calm, magnetic. People say it's fiction, he said. But every story begins somewhere real. The audience laughed softly. He smiled. Let's just say, I had a muse. Ava shut the TV off. The room felt smaller suddenly, her lungs tighter. He had taken everything, her story, her name, her truth, and turned it into his mythology. He'd rewritten her into a ghost even before she vanished, but ghosts could still haunt. That night, she logged into an old laptop under a borrowed Wi-Fi signal. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't have her audience anymore, didn't have her fan base, but maybe she didn't need them. She began to type, not another story, but a confession of her own. She uploaded it to anonymous forums, to every corner of the internet that still remembered her name. She included screenshots, timestamps, drafts, metadata, proof that she was the original. Her post ended with one line, "He doesn't write stories. He steals them." Then she clicked publish. Within hours, it spread. Readers recognized her phrasing. Critics began to question his timeline. His interviews suddenly looked rehearsed. And somewhere in his glass tower, Luca must have realized she was writing again. Not fiction this time. Revenge. And this time, she would decide how the ending went. By morning, Ava's words had already set the internet on fire. Her anonymous confession, part memoir, part evidence, spread like lightning. Blogs dissected every sentence. Forums lit up with debate. Half believed her. Half called her delusional. But one truth pulsed beneath the noise. Someone was lying. Luca moved fast. By noon, his PR team had flooded the media with statements. Smooth, polished denials. A baseless hoax, they called it. A bitter ex-employee seeking attention. The talk shows replayed his interviews on loop. He's too intelligent, one host said. Why would a man like that steal fan fiction? The audience laughed. The world laughed. And Ava watched from a motel room, shaking with rage. He had turned her truth into a punchline. Her email filled with messages, some supportive, others cruel. He made you up. Stop pretending you're real. The book's better without you anyway. She wanted to disappear again. But then, deep in the flood of messages, she found one that stopped her breath cold. From unknown sender. Subject, he's watching me too. Body, I used to write for him. I know what he does. If you want proof, come to Milan. Tomorrow. Midnight. The pier. No signature. No attachment. Just a location. For a long time, Ava stared at the screen. It could be a trap. Of course it could. But something in the tone, shaky, terrified, felt real. And if someone else had suffered what she had, she couldn't ignore it. That night she packed again. One bag, no trace. The train to Milan groaned through the darkness, its rhythm syncing with her heartbeat. At dawn, she saw his face again, on billboards this time. Luca Moretti, for one New York Times bestseller. The sight of it twisted her stomach. He wasn't just erasing her anymore. He was ascending on her ashes. In the city, everything felt like surveillance, cameras, reflections, mirrors. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into his story. By midnight, she reached the pier. Fog clung to the water. A single figure waited under the lamplight. A woman, small and tense, holding a folder. "You came," the woman said softly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Who are you?" Ava whispered. "I was his ghostwriter, until I stopped being useful." She handed Ava the folder. Inside were drafts, identical paragraphs typed years before his book's release. The same phrasing, same structure, same lies. Proof. Ava's hands trembled. "Why give this to me?" "Because he ruined me too," the woman said. "And because he'll come for you now." The woman turned and vanished into the fog before Ava could speak again. Ava clutched the folder tight. For the first time, she wasn't powerless. She had evidence. She had truth. But she also knew Luca wouldn't let her live long enough to use it. She looked out at the black water and whispered, "Then we finish this in public." The story wasn't over. It was about to go live. Ava didn't sleep that night. The folder sat open on the motel bed, pages and drafts scattered like pieces of a detonated past. Every file bore Luca's signature. Every date, every phrase, every stolen word was proof. Proof of his theft. Proof of his obsession. Proof that her nightmare had never been fiction. By morning, she had a plan. She wouldn't hide this time. She would burn him down, in front of the same world he had convinced to adore him. At sunrise, she slipped into an internet cafe and logged into a new anonymous account. She uploaded everything: screenshots, metadata, side-by-side comparisons. The ghostwriter's files. Her final post began, "He made me disappear once. Let's see if he can erase me twice." Within minutes, it spread. Journalists picked it up. Influencers dissected it. And by afternoon, the tag, "Who's the real author?" was everywhere. That was when the phone rang. Not her phone, one of the cafe's public ones, ringing insistently behind the counter. The clerk frowned, answered, then looked at her. "It's for you," he said quietly. Ava froze. Only one person would know where she was. She took the receiver. Luca's voice flowed through the line, calm, cold, and somehow intimate. "You just declared war, Ava." She said nothing. "You think this ends with truth? It ends with who survives the fallout. You're not built for this world." Her throat tightened. "Neither are you, Luca. You were written, not born." He laughed once, a sound that wasn't joy but disbelief. "You still don't understand. The moment you wrote me, I became real. And now, I'm the only one who gets to write the ending." The line clicked dead. An hour later, the cafe's power cut out. Lights died. Screens went black. Outside, 2 black cars pulled to the curb. Ava grabbed her bag and ran. Through alleys, across cobblestones slick with rain. Footsteps echoed behind her. Shouts, tires screeching. She darted into a crowded market and slipped between stalls, heart hammering. At the far end, a shadow moved against the light. Him. Luca stood there, drenched, perfectly composed. People passed between them, oblivious. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His voice carried over the noise. "You've made me a villain," he said. "But villains never die quietly." She held up her phone, live stream open. "Smile for the camera, Luca. Let's give them the ending they've been waiting for." For the first time, his expression faltered. Not from fear, but from admiration. "You really are a writer," he murmured. He stepped forward. She hit Go Live. The screen lit with viewers, comments racing. The crowd parted as they faced each other. Author and character, creation and creator, trapped in a story that neither could escape anymore. And for the first time since this began, Ava wasn't afraid. Because now the whole world was watching. The rain came harder now, turning the market into a blur of umbrellas, reflections, and whispers. Ava stood in the center, soaked to the bone, the phone in her shaking hand streaming live to tens of thousands of people. Luca stood a few yards away, still immaculate despite the storm. Dark suit, darker eyes, the faintest smile. "You think the truth saves you?" he said, voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "It already has," she said. "They're watching you. Every word, every lie. You can't hide behind charm anymore." He took a slow step forward. "They'll believe whatever I tell them. They always do." "No," she whispered. "Not this time." She turned the phone so the viewers could see him. Comments exploded across the screen. "Is that really him? What's happening? This is real. Oh my God." For the first time, he looked uncertain. "Just a flicker, but enough. You want it to be real?" she said. "Here's your chance. Tell them who you really are." He met her gaze. "I'm the man you made. You wanted power, mystery, danger, so I gave it to you. You wrote me into existence. You fell in love with the darkness, Ava. Don't pretend you didn't." The words hit like a slap. She felt her throat tighten. He was twisting her truth again, reshaping it, making her complicit in his myth. But this time, she didn't run from it. "You're right," she said. "I did write you, but I never wrote this." She lifted the folder, his drafts, his plagiarism, every page soaked through but legible. "You stole what you couldn't create. You don't exist without me." Something broke in his expression. An almost imperceptible crack in that perfect facade. Then he lunged. Not with violence, but desperation. He grabbed the phone. The camera spun, the live stream jerking as voices screamed in the comments. The world saw everything, his hand clutching hers, the chaos, the fear. "End it," he hissed. "Delete it, Ava." She looked into his eyes and saw what she hadn't before. Not power, fear. Because for the first time, his story wasn't under his control. "No," she said softly. "You end it," and she let go. The phone slipped from her hand, hit the pavement, and shattered. But not before streaming his final look. Rage, disbelief, then silence. When the police arrived, the crowd was already filming. Luca didn't resist. He stood motionless as officers pulled him away, rain still falling like static over the broken phone. Later, the headlines flooded in. Best-selling author exposed for plagiarism and coercion. Fanfiction scandal rocks publishing world. Who was Ava? She didn't give interviews, didn't appear on camera. She vanished again, this time by choice. Some said she'd gone back to writing under a new name. Others claimed she disappeared with her words, leaving only one final post that appeared briefly before being deleted. The story is over, but the ending belongs to me. Months passed. Seasons changed. The scandal faded from the headlines the way every storm eventually does, loud at first, then slowly dissolving into whispers and echoes. But Ava didn't vanish. Somewhere along the Italian coast, in a quiet town where the sea brushed the cliffs like a secret, she found herself again. The mornings were slower there, the coffee stronger, the silence softer, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't writing for survival. She was writing for herself. She sat by the open window of a small apartment overlooking the sea, her laptop glowing faintly against the dim light. No followers, no algorithms, no one waiting to steal her voice, just her, and the story that had started everything. She opened the document titled Mafia Boss and His Assistant, unfinished. Her cursor blinked like a heartbeat. She read the old lines, the ones that once terrified her because they mirrored the man who had haunted her. Now they felt different, distant, powerless. She began typing, slowly at first, then faster. Her words no longer trembled. They burned. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a villain. He was a reflection of every secret I was too afraid to tell. But I told it anyway, and in doing so, I became free. The page filled up, not with fantasy, but truth. And as the sun set outside, she smiled, because the ending wasn't about him. It was about her, the girl who wrote her pain into power, who turned fear into fire, who learned that the only story worth telling is the one that belongs to you. She hit save. Then, for the first time in years, she hit publish. Not to go viral. Not to prove a point, but because she knew, somewhere out there, someone needed to read it. The screen faded to black. Her final author note appeared, just a few simple lines. If you've ever felt small, write anyway. If you've ever been silenced, speak anyway. Because stories don't belong to the ones who steal them. They belong to the ones brave enough to tell them. Then a soft smile crept across her lips as she whispered to the empty room. Let's see who finds this one. Fade out. Soft piano music rises. The faint sound of typing continues in the background, steady, alive. Then the last words appear on screen. If this story found you, it means you were meant to hear it. Tell me in the comments if you want part 2. The fanfic queen returns. Subscribe to see what Ava writes next, because some stories never really end. They just begin again.